In 1500, Pedro Alvarez Cabral landed on the coast of what would become Brazil after a storm blew his ships off course. The Treaty of Tordesillas had already designated this land to Portugal, shaping South America's division. The Portuguese established coastal towns and initially profited from Brazil wood. Sugarcane plantations soon became the main economic activity, relying on enslaved Africans due to the resistance and diseases affecting the native population. Bandeirantes explored the interior, seeking wealth and capturing natives, expanding Portugal's territory, though often violently. This expansion shaped Brazil into the diverse country it is today, with a legacy of exploitation and conflict that continues to have effects. When gold was discovered in Minas Gerais in the late 1600s, Brazil became much more important to Portugal. This made Portugal richer, but people in Brazil got angry about paying so many taxes. Some early fights for freedom, like in Inconfidência Mineira, were stopped. A big change happened when Napoleon attacked Portugal in 1807. The king ran away to Rio de Janeiro, making Brazil the center of the Portuguese kingdom. They opened ports, built schools and banks, and people started to feel more like their own country. After Napoleon lost, King João VI went back to Portugal, leaving his son Dom Pedro in charge. On September 7, 1822, Dom Pedro declared Independência ou morte, independence or death, and said Brazil was free. And so, the Empire of Brazil began. Becoming independent didn't fix all the big problems right away, but the groundwork for Brazil to be its own special country was now set. When Dom Pedro I was king, things were not very stable. There were fights in different parts of Brazil and a war with Argentina about a place called Uruguay. There was so much trouble in politics that he had to give up being king in 1831. His young son, Dom Pedro II, became emperor. But since he was just a kid, other people ruled for him for a while, and it was a rough time. Big rebellions like the Cabanagem and the Farroupilha War showed that people in different parts of the country were very divided. When Pedro II was 14, they said he was old enough to rule. He ruled for a long time and brought calm. Brazil started to become more modern, and coffee became the main thing that made money for the country. Gap 2, S. They built railroads and telegraph lines, and many people from Europe moved to Brazil. This changed the country a lot. Brazil fought a very tough war against Paraguay with Argentina and Uruguay. It was called the War of the Triple Alliance. It was terrible, but it made the army more important in Brazil. Even though things were getting better in some ways, the big problems of slavery and people not being treated equally were still there. It seemed like a great time for the empire, but underneath there were tensions that were about to cause big trouble. As Pedro II got older, more and more people wanted changes. The movement to end slavery got stronger. In 1888, a law called the Golden Law ended slavery. But this made the rich landowners who used slaves very angry, and it made the king less powerful. The army, feeling strong from winning wars and with new ideas about not having a king, went against the emperor. In 1889, an army leader named Marshal Deodoro da Fonseca took over without any fighting. This ended the empire, and the king's family had to leave Brazil. They announced the first Brazilian Republic, also called the Old Republic. It was set up a bit like the United States, where different states have some power. But the real power was with rich families in different regions, especially the coffee farm owners in São Paulo and the dairy farm owners in Minas Gerais. This was called café com leite politics, which means coffee with milk politics, named after what these areas produced. Power was in the hands of a few. There wasn't much real democracy for everyone, and unfairness between people continued. The country kept modernizing its economy, and more people moved there. But real, deep changes were hard to make. The king losing power so peacefully showed that the rich people and the army didn't support him anymore. Brazil started a new chapter, but the old ways of some people being left out and others having special advantages stayed. The way rich families ruled during the Old Republic made many people angry and restless, especially people in the cities and in the army. In the 1920s, there were revolts by young army officers called tenentes. They wanted changes and for Brazil to become more modern. In 1929, a big money crisis around the world really hurt Brazil's coffee sales. This made the people in charge look bad. In 1930, a man named Getulio Vargas, with help from the army and leaders from different regions, took power in a revolution. When Vargas was in charge, he made new laws to help workers, allowed women to vote, and created a new set of rules for the country. But he also took more and more power for himself. In 1937, Vargas basically took over from himself. He closed down the government and started a new system where he had all the power, called the Estado Novo, or New State. The Estado Novo helped build more factories and gave some rights to workers, but it also stopped anyone who disagreed and kept all the power with him. Vargas's government helped Brazil become more modern, but people lost their freedom to choose their leaders. The army became even more important, which led to them getting involved in government again later on. Brazil changed a lot, but the fight between having a strong ruler and having a government chosen by the people would go on. The Estado Novo only finished after World War II, when more and more people started demanding to have democracy again. After World War II, Brazil had a short time with democracy, but there were problems with stability and money. Building the new capital city, Brasilia, was a symbol of hope for a modern Brazil. But prices kept going up really fast and people were very divided. President João Goulart wanted to make changes that some people thought were too left. This worried conservatives and the army. In 1964, the army, with some US support, removed Goulart from power. They said they would bring order, but instead Brazil had a dictatorship for 20 years. The army government banned political groups, stopped people from speaking out, and made laws by themselves. It got very strict, especially after AI5 in 1968. For a while the economy grew a lot, called an economic miracle. But rich people got richer and poor people didn't, and the government was very harsh. Many people's basic rights were taken away and opponents were treated badly. The army's control started to weaken when problems grew in the 1970s. The economic prosperity under military rule didn't last, leading to debt and widespread discontent. Harsh government control and censorship left deep scars. Opposition grew, and in 1979 the amnesty law allowed exiles to return, though it controversially protected those who committed abuses during the dictatorship. The Direitos Já movement mobilized millions demanding direct elections. In 1985, Tancredo Neves was chosen as president, but died before taking office, leading to José Sarney becoming president during the transition to democracy. The 1988 Citizen Constitution promised to protect rights and help society. Although the transition was difficult, the era of military rule was over, and Brazil aimed to build a fairer, more inclusive democracy. The 1988 Constitution started what's called Brazil's new republic. But there were still big problems with money. When Sarney was president, prices went up incredibly fast, hyperinflation. Then Fernando Collor, the first president chosen by direct vote in many years, was removed from office because he was corrupt. Itamar Franco, who took over, started a plan called the Plano Real that helped fix the economy. This helped Fernando Henrique Cardoso become president, and he made more changes to how the economy worked. When Cardoso was president, things were more stable, and Brazil became more connected with the rest of the world, but the gap between rich and poor was still a big problem. In 2002, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva was elected, and this was a big change. His government started programs that helped millions of poor people have better lives. Brazil became more important in the world, but there were still challenges. Dilma Rousseff became Brazil's first woman president. She had to deal with a bad economy and a huge scandal about corruption called Lava Jato, or car wash. Rousseff was removed from office in 2016. This made people even more divided in their opinions and showed that Brazil's democracy could still be easily shaken. Politics in Brazil was still very lively, but also full of arguments. Modern Brazil has seen a lot of good things happen, but it still faces ongoing problems. Brazil's story, from being a colony to a modern democracy, has gone through times of getting better and times of big problems over and over. The 1988 Constitution promised rights and democracy, but making all those promises come true for everyone is still something Brazil is working on. In the past, the army often saw itself as the one to keep order. Even though the rules now say the government is in charge, that old idea sometimes still affects politics. Today, Brazil is an important country in its region. It has many different ways of making money and a wonderful culture, but it also has big problems with unfairness between people and with protecting its environment. The effects of slavery from a long time ago, differences between parts of the country, and times when rulers had too much power still influence Brazil's journey. When many people come together to demand something like they did in the Direitos Já movement, it shows that Brazilians really care about democracy. For Brazil to have a good future, it needs to learn from its history and make its government and laws stronger. Brazil's story is about being able to bounce back from tough times, change, and always keep trying to create a fairer society for everyone.